The following podcast is a presentation of Project Entertainment Network.
Welcome to Staring Into the Abyss. I'm your host, Richard Gerlach. With me, as always, is Michael Patrick Hicks.
Good morning.
As always, as well, Matt Brandenburg.
Oh, man, I love staring into that tunnel of teeth.
Tonight, or today, or whenever you listen to this podcast, we're going to be discussing Teeth by Matt Cardin. It is in this collection to Rouse Leviathan. Be sure to pick that up and read it because it is fucking fantastic.
Yes, indeed.
And speaking of... this is your first time reading Matt Cardin, is it, Mike?
Yes, it is.
How did you enjoy?
I dug the hell out of this collection. This was great.
Yeah.
Very, very dense, but very, very good.
It's extremely dense.
I do really appreciate the ideas he put forth in terms of trying to relate Christian myth with cosmological horror. It was really well done.
Yeah, it's a great mix between like Christian theology, H.P. Lovecraft, and Thomas Ligotti.
Yes.
It's like a great three-way between those things.
If you ever want a threesome, that's the one to go with.
Oh man, I don't know.
Yeah, you would definitely
just search Xvideo. You might be able to find it. Xvideo Pornhub. Just type in.
Just look for Jesus porn. You'll be fine.
I mean, that's a real thing, though.
Is it?
I mean, I think so. I mean, I could imagine that someone's
surprised.
Let me find.
I mean, the holes in his hands got to be good for something.
Okay. The fun holes.
All right, I'm typing it in now. Let's find out.
Maybe that's what.
For anyone we haven't alienated already.
Yeah,
okay,
right.
So I just typed in Jesus in Pornhub, and the first results I get are Jesus Christ, Jesus body, Jesus Judas cartoon, and Black Jesus.
Oh my god!
Let's go with Jesus Christ.
There was a publisher that popped up in my Twitter feed about a new theological book, and the picture they used of Christ. Scrolling fast, I thought it was an erotica novel, but it turns out it was just Jesus.
Okay, so it's honestly just like nun porn.
It's a whole market people are missing.
Yeah, we're gonna have to tap into that, I think.
They got to fix that.
Yeah.
Anyway, besides that diversion.
Phrasing, by the way.
Besides that small diversion, on Into the Abyss, we like to give a recommendation of media that we've consumed in this last week. So I have a few things, but the first thing I want to give a recommendation to is Monsterland, the the Hulu series based on Nathan Ballingrud's North Atlantic Lake Monsters, North American Lake Monsters. I've only seen the first episode. The normies are kind of on the fence about it because it's more of like a slow burn type series.
The normies.
You know I'm right though. Like there's the horror fans and then there's the normies who kind of dabble in horror.
Yeah.
And I think like the normie crowd is watching this and expecting it to be like in your face scares and monsters, but it's Nathan Ballingrud, so we know it's a bit more slow moving, a bit more methodical, a bit more like subtle, cerebral. So I feel there's a disconnect when it comes to that.
Yeah.
But I'm digging it so far. The first episode is pretty fucking great.
Good. Well, I don't have Hulu, so whenever it hits iTunes, I'll be looking for that one. And I'm hoping already they get a second season so they can adapt some of the material from Wounds.
Yeah.
Oh, I'd love to see some of that.
I watched maybe the first 20 minutes, 30 minutes of the first episode, and
it's really slow.
Well, not even, but just some of the topics they deal with were pretty rough. So
murder, child abuse,
yeah,
taking over someone's identity.
It's a tough
very
one.
biblical.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Kind of loop it back to the Jesus.
It is a very tough watch at points. I dug the first episode, though, so I'm excited to see where it goes. I have one more media recommendation, but I'll save it for a little rant. But, Mike, what about you?
Well, reading-wise, all I did this week was read To Rouse Leviathan. This has been in my TBR for a little while, so knowing that we were doing Teeth today, I decided, you know what, I'm just going to go all in, and I'm going to read this whole collection. So that's what I did.
Good.
We watched, finally, It Chapter 2 last night.
I'm sorry.
I have not seen that yet.
Yeah. Well, you know what? I'm glad I wasn't in a big rush to see it. My wife, who is a normie, as you would say, is I think she liked it more than I did. They really dropped the ball after part one.
They really did.
Part one is one of my favorite movies. I think that one just became an instant favorite for me. Chapter 2 was, I don't think it was as bad as everyone has been saying it is, but
it's not as bad as everyone says it is. It's just disappointing.
Yeah, it's not great. It is watchable. You know, it's a passable flick if you have 3 hours to kill and nothing better to do. It doesn't ever reach the heights of chapter 1. It's nowhere near as good.
It also, one thing I hated about chapter 2 is so for the first one, it was actually scary. It had some really good jump scares.
Yeah.
And in the second one, all the scares are punchlines.
Yeah, there was nothing.
It follows every scare with a joke. So it's tension, comedy, tension, comedy.
Yeah, because I had warned my wife beforehand that, people are saying this is basically a comedy. And we're a little bit into it, and she's like, I'm not getting any comedy out of this so far. And then, was it Eddie gets vomited on by the leper?
And it plays that song.
Yeah. And then he runs up the stairs and can't figure out how to open the door. And the lady tells him it's push, not pull, dummy.
Oh,
and that's when my wife looked at me and she's like, oh, okay. Yeah, I can see the comedy now. I see why they're saying that. I'm like, yeah. And then you get the scene with Bill Denbrough buying silver back from Stephen King's used Emporium guy, the antique shop. And he's doing that hi-ho silver, and then the bike
Stephen
breaks.
King cameo.
What's that?
I did like the Stephen King cameo. I just don't think silver works in the 80s. It makes sense in the 50s when they're kids in the book.
Personally, as someone who grew up in the 80s, I watched Lone Ranger. I mean, it was on all the time, so that was still a reference for me. I thought that worked okay because it was always on in reruns.
Oh, I didn't know that then.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I had Lone Ranger, the toy pistols, Lone Ranger action figures. Yeah, I mean, Lone Ranger, 30 years after, it was still pretty much a relevant touchstone for my childhood.
I also hated, I should say I hated it. I was bothered by the way they addressed homosexuality in that movie. They made Richie gay, right?
Yeah, arguably.
And, I mean, it was pretty clear.
That. Yeah. It's clear, but I think there's enough leeway there that they can kind of hem and haw around it that they didn't really, they can retcon it away if they wanted to. It's implied. I don't think they necessarily took a direct, definitive statement that it was that way.
It seemed to kind of say if you're gay, your only reasoning in this world is to suffer. Every gay character that in the book it makes sense when Adrian gets killed, but in the movie it was just kind of it felt like a weird message to give in 2019 when they released it.
Yeah,
where it's instead of embracing homosexuality, Richie was tormented by it.
Yeah, and I think he's still very much in the closet. And,
very much. But it was just an awkward message to give in 2019, I felt.
Yeah. Well, on a related note, since you're on Twitter ban currently, suspended.
Yeah.
Speaking of being out of the closet in 2020, the Pride Boys hashtag has been hijacked by gay Twitter.
Oh, fuck yeah.
It is amazing. So fuck the Proud Boys. This is delightful.
Yeah, we both, Mike and I both ended up in Twitter jail. Arguably, I am mad because what you said was way worse than what I said, and you only got 12 hours. I got 7 days.
Was it? I don't know. I think we were pretty on par. I just asked Joe Biden to punch Donald Trump and lay him out on stage and bloody him up. I don't think that was...
I just told him to punch him. I didn't even tell him to bloody him up. I just said punch him. Don't use your words.
I gotta go back. I thought you told him to like break his fucking teeth and...
No, I said fucking punch him in the face.
Yeah, well, that's about what I said.
But I didn't say bloody him up. I just said use your fists, not your words.
Still, it was my first offense, apparently.
Although I was reading, and apparently when people get like suspended on Twitter, it's usually between like 12, 24, and 48 hours. And I got like a week.
Yeah. You got
I'm also
7-day ban hammer.
I'm bleeding subscribers now too, like followers. Yeah. I had like 1,005 before the suspension. Now I'm not down to 998.
Oh, I've lost 20 or 30 over the last few days. But you know what? It's winnowing out
my bots. You can have some of the bots following me. So.
Yeah.
It's thinning the herd. I'm getting rid of the Trump supporters. I'm okay with that. I don't mind losing the fluff there.
So, Matt, what about you? Any recommendations from last week?
So I talked enough about Langan. I did finally finish that this week, so I won't mention that anymore. I started The Fun House, which we're going to talk about next week, so I'll save my comments. Show? Which one?
The Freak Show?
Or Freak Show. Why do I keep calling it Fun House? I don't know. The Freak Show. So I'll probably call it like 20 times that next week, but... So I'll say my comments on that. So what I will talk about is I also watched a movie. This was the week of movies for all of us. In fact, I watched 2 movies this week.
Oh shit.
I watched, the first one I'll talk is Scare Me. I don't know if either of you have heard of that. It's on Shudder.
Oh, it's on Shudder, right?
Yes. I think it just came out this week.
I almost pulled the trigger on that.
It is brilliant. The basic concept is, and it's kind of like a dark comedy following this guy who is a writer or wants to be a writer, and he gets a cabin in the middle of nowhere, and his neighbor cabin is this best-selling horror author named Fanny something. It's a really funny last name. It kind of rhymes with Fanny. And she is this huge author for writing a zombie novel, and they're neighbors, and the power goes out. So Fanny comes over to this, I think the guy's name is Brian, goes over to his cabin, and they start telling each other scary stories. And it's the way they do the scary stories is great. So it's not quite an anthology. It's because it's them playing whatever characters are in the story, and they just only hint at certain things. So Brian's story, the big thing he's working on is a werewolf revenge story, which Fanny kind of scoffs at and is like, all right, well, tell me the story. And so he kind of acts out all the parts, and every once in a while his hands would turn into like werewolf hands, or there'd be shadows in the cabin that looks like a werewolf, but otherwise it's just him telling the story, acting everything. And so then they kind of go back and forth, each telling kind of spooky stories, and they you start realizing that, well, Brian starts realizing that, like, one, he's just not good. He just can't write a story. He doesn't know where to go with it. And Fanny, she can do really well with the story, but she's also kind of antagonizing Brian, and bringing up things that come up nowadays, obviously, but bringing up things like, why does your main character have to be male? Make it a female. Give me the details. I think that for a writer watching and listening to him talk, I mean, there's a ton of great, just simple advice, and her voice just sticks in your head. I mean, she's always trying to get more out of him. And the big thing that she tells is like, to actually do something. A lot of people, and we all know it, you can kind of get stuck in a rut and you just stop producing anything. And that's kind of where he's at. He's staring at a blank page, and he doesn't know where to go with this blank page. And she's like, you just got to do something. You can't just sit and say you're going to do this. You actually have to do it. That advice is very good. But then slowly the comedy gets a little darker and darker until you get to the very tense ending where something between the two is not quite right. But it's great. I absolutely loved it. It's such a smart way to do it and such a simple concept. It probably didn't cost him very much to just sit in this cabin with the camera and have the two actors kind of doing things and then just kind of ramping up the stuff of what's happening between them and what actually is happening. So it is highly recommend it. Scare Me. It was brilliant.
I'll have to check that out. It sounds awesome.
It's super good.
I have a question for you guys. Yes. Why do we keep on remaking British shows?
Because
it's easy.
Yeah, but the ideas
they
are
speak
already
English,
there. But they have an accent, so they're foreigners.
But we have an accent,
and they didn't make it here.
So I started watching the remake of Utopia on Amazon. Have you guys seen the original Utopia?
I didn't even know it was a thing.
Yeah.
Oh, dude. So the original UK Utopia is one of my favorite conspiracy thriller shows. I was when that show first came out, of course it's a British show, so most Americans are the fuck's this? But
right.
When I was watching it, I was hooked. Right away, I was fucking hooked. The plot's pretty simple. It's just it's not too simple. Pretty much in the universe of the Utopia, there was a comic book called Dystopia. And in this comic book, the guy who wrote it and illustrated it, he's a big reclusive person. And this comic book was hidden until people found it and mass published it, and it gained a huge following. And in this comic book, it had cryptic hints towards the Ebola virus and chemical warfare and germ warfare and someone plotting to destroy the world through bioterrorism acts and stuff like that. And so it spawned this huge following. And the creator made a sequel called Utopia. And Utopia for the longest time was an urban legend until someone finds it. And at the same time of someone finding Utopia, their Utopia hints at a company creating a type of superflu virus. And around the same time the comic book is found, people begin dying of a very advanced type of flu, which is a very great show to release right now.
Right.
I gotta say.
Good timing.
It follows 4 comic nerds, and they meet a woman named Jessica Hyde, who's the main character of the comic book, who turns out to be a real person. And together they get involved in this big conspiracy mystery that involves multi-million-dollar corporations, food and meat packaging plants, and a super virus. The American version is so far decent. I think because I saw the British version first, that's clouding my judgment.
Okay.
Yeah.
But the American version is written by Gillian Flynn. She wrote every episode.
Oh, wow.
Huh.
So, if you're a fan of Gillian Flynn, it's worth checking out. And she is keeps it pretty true to the British show. But I do think the British show has one of the best TV show openings I've ever seen for the pilot episode. The pilot episode of the original, you can find on YouTube easily. But since this one came out, you cannot find the UK Utopia at all here. It's gone. But the opening scene is it's a comic book shop, and these 2 guys walk in, and they have this yellow bag. And the yellow bag has sleeping gas. That's really poison gas. And they go to the guy selling the comics at the register, and they're looking for someone he sold the comic to. And while they're doing that, his buddy's killing everybody in the comic store with sleeping gas.
Oh, wow.
And then it ends with him killing the cashier with sleeping gas. Then the main guy sees a little kid hiding under a counter, and he goes, "Bring the gas back. We got one more." And then it rolls like Utopia.
Wow.
Wow. Okay, cool.
The American one is the people inherit this guy's grandfather's house, and they find the comic in that house. And then they start a underground Comic-Con to invite people over to see the issue of Utopia, and that invites these people who want to keep the secrets in that comic silent, who begin killing everyone who attends this Comic-Con one by one.
Nice.
The American version has John Cusack in it, so if you're a John Cusack fan like myself, you'll find a lot to like there. And overall, I'd say give it a check out. If you can get your hands on the British version, highly recommended, but the American one's a fun watch so far.
Yeah, I guess I thought it was like a far future sci-fi story just based on the title.
Yeah,
no, it's set now, and I think the reviews are kind of like meddling.
Yeah.
And I think they're meddling because a lot of them say the show's very pessimistic, which is true. It's a very, very pessimistic show. And it's a bad time to release a show about a super virus.
Yeah.
Right.
And
so the normies are up in arms.
And there are some extended torture scenes that leave people uncomfortable.
Oh, wow.
Like the second episode has, and this is the same in the British version too, one of the main characters gets his eye cut out with a spoon in the second episode.
Goodness.
Like they slow torture him. They dump bleach in his eye.
Wow.
And like, because he's seen the comic. So they're trying to get information from him about like where the comic is. So they're slow torturing him to like get the information from him, but he doesn't know where it is. So, and they end up cutting out his eye.
Pretty serious series. This is not like a goofy little sci-fi thing.
No, I mean, it does have a lot of levity in it. Like there is a lot of comic relief in the series, but it gets serious when it needs to, and it can be pretty uncomfortable to watch at times. Yeah, like when in the first episode, spoiler for first episode, when they're trying to track down the comic and they're killing everyone who sees the comic, they have like a history of all these people. So they find ways to make all their deaths look like accidents.
Oh, jeez.
So like the people who find the comics, they literally poison them with needles, and then they just leave the needles in their arms. They tie all their arms off to make it look like they all died of a drug overdose.
Oh, God.
One character is mentally unstable, and they shoot him in the head, and then they rub their fingerprints off the gun and put the gun in his hand to make it look like he killed himself. Mm. So they just like take down all these people and kind of erase the fact that they were there completely.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I guess just going off the title, knowing absolutely nothing about it other than John Cusack is in it, I just kind of figured it was a kind of like a sci-fi comedy, kind of like a Grosse Point Blank meets Star Trek sort of utopia.
The guy down on his luck and just stumbles into adventure.
Yeah, but this sounds a hell of a lot more intriguing than I was willing to give it. So, yeah, I'm going to have to check this out. This sounds fantastic.
Yeah, if you enjoy like conspiracy thrillers, it's definitely worth watching.
Okay, I'm in.
I will say the British show got canceled because they couldn't finish the story.
Okay.
So maybe the American one might be able to finish it.
Yeah, maybe.
The British one had controversy because in the second season, they based a plot point on like a real life assassination that happened in the 70s.
Oh, wow.
And that rubbed a lot of people the wrong way in Europe.
So when did the BBC version come out?
It's actually on Channel 4.
Okay.
The Channel 4 version came out 2013. And I think the second season was either 2014 or 2015.
Wow.
And then it got canceled.
That's funny that a show in 2013 was controversial for using something from the 70s.
Right.
That is definitely not something I don't think that would happen here in America, where it's like we have no sense of long-term history. So it's kind of like, the 70s? I wasn't even alive then. Fuck it.
And I will say one last thing. I did watch one of my favorite movies last night, which isn't horror, but I just want to recommend it for people who haven't watched it because no one's fucking seen this movie, The Nice Guys.
Yeah,
if you haven't seen this movie, Mike, you gotta fix that.
I don't even know what that is.
Is that the one with Russell Crowe?
Russell Crowe and
Ryan Gosling.
Ryan Gosling.
Oh.
It's Shane Black's last like noir detective movie before he fucked everything up with Predators.
Is it set during Christmas? Is it a Christmas movie?
There is a Christmas scene at the end.
Yes.
I mean, it's got to be, right? Shane
Black.
It's
Shane Black. It's pretty much a porn actress has been mysteriously killed by having her car driven off the road. And this alcoholic private investigator has to team up with Russell Crowe, who's like the muscle guy, and try to figure out what's really going on. It involves a conspiracy plot involving the Detroit auto manufacturers and the porn industry.
Nice.
Highly recommended. It's a lot of fun. But that's it for me. You guys have anything else?
Nothing on my end. Matt?
Yes. I believe you guys probably both seen this, but maybe not. I finally watched The Babysitter.
The Babysitter is so much fun.
Yeah, I just watched that not too long ago.
It's on Netflix for those listening. Oh my gosh, that was amazing.
It was a lot of fun. The humor was a little too juvenile for me, but it was a really fun movie.
Yeah, I mean, it was a little juvenile. I did like that they definitely portrayed 12-year-olds properly. I love when he kept talking about Protestants instead of prostitutes. And orgies and how I think what they had to use blood for orgies and stuff like that. I thought that was hilarious.
Samara Weaving, as always, was awesome.
Yes,
very much.
She was great. The kid was excellent. I kept cracking up at, I can't remember the actor's name or the character's name, but the guy that had his shirt off like throughout the whole movie. I loved when he was like, man, you gotta go stick up for yourself with that bully. And then or later he's like, I'm not gonna let you die with egg on your face. And
every time they see him, it's like, why is your shirt off?
Yeah.
There's no
That's your first question.
You still haven't answered. I loved it. That, and I loved all the little added kind of Scott Pilgrim-esque title things that would pop up every once in a while. I thought that was a lot of fun. So yeah, I'm trying to be good. We're recording this at the beginning of October, and so I'm trying to watch like horror movies, maybe not every day, but almost every day.
The gore is really good in that movie too.
Yeah,
they got some really good kills in that movie.
Yeah. I think the one that kind of shocked me was at the beginning where the guy falls on the statue.
Yeah. And I did have a little freak out through all of it because their crawl space had tarantulas in it. I was like, where are they living and how are they fine with it?
Yeah.
I love Kim Marino as the dad.
Yeah, he was absolutely brilliant. It was an absolute blast. I loved it, and I think we're gonna try to watch the second one tonight. So
yeah, I gotta watch the second
one's
one.
Really funny.
Is it?
It got worse reviews than the first movie, but I kind of liked it on par as the first movie. Ken Marino has a bigger role in the second one. This is a slight spoiler for the second movie, but the girl who's like the kind of love interest in The Babysitter, like his friend that's his age.
Yeah.
Her dad's like a big stoner, and Ken Marino goes over to like their house to smoke pot. And like there's a part where like the kids are missing, and the mother's like, "We need to find our kids." He's like, "I'm going to stay here. I'm not going to do pot, and we're going to make sure we find our kids." And then later he ends up smoking pot, and his wife's like, "You done pot?" And he's like, "Maybe a little."
That's good. I don't think I've seen Ken Marino since Veronica Mars, so it's fun to see him again.
Man,
he's really funny. But the second one, it's literally on par with the first one. It's pretty much the same plot over again. It's like,
yeah, I was kind of thinking I was just expecting more of the same with that one,
and
which is okay.
All the cult comes back.
Yes, we watched
the shirtless dude.
No, yeah.
Who's even more buff in the sequel.
I guess death has been good to him, apparently.
Right.
Bella Thorne comes back. She's really funny in the sequel. I forget the black guy's name, but there's a part in the sequel where like he doesn't die first, and he's like, "I ain't gonna die first. This is some woke post Jordan Peele horror statement."
So no, even dead, he's still on top of cultural references.
Yeah. But both those movies are really good.
Yes, I loved it. It was such a blast. So yes, I'm looking forward to the second one.
Let's move on to satanic cults into biblical apocalypses.
Yes,
with the Matt Cardin.
It's related.
It is.
Yeah, it's a good segue for once.
With Matt Cardin's teeth. Before we get started,
not his actual teeth.
not his actual teeth.
Just a picture of his teeth in the book.
Before we dive into the story,
he has really good dentist.
I believe it. How the fuck is this Matt Cardin's first story?
Yeah, that is.
Holy shit! This is an incredible story. That's like your first published work.
He's awful.
Yeah.
Matt Cardin is the worst.
Well, and it's funny because I probably, if you listen back to earlier episodes, I think I read this at the beginning of the year, and I didn't even realize that was his first story until listening to the PseudoPod when they kind of talked about it coming out in '98. And I was like, holy crap.
I didn't know Matt Cardin had been around this long.
He's kind of like Jon Padgett, where he publishes few and far between, but everything he published is fucking gold.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, I can't think of I've read the whole collection, and I loved every story in this collection.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's hard to pinpoint, too. There isn't really any dip in quality where you can kind of like, oh, this was his first story. Right. This was, there isn't any kind of evolution. Like, apparently he just started out great and maintained that consistency.
I mean, he might have also taken his sweet-ass time writing the story, too. Because you can tell, like, every word was really carefully picked in writing this story.
And there's a lot of words.
Yeah. One thing to our audience who hasn't read Cardin yet, he is very dense.
Yes.
I think that goes into saying with his main influences being Lovecraft and Ligotti.
And lots of biblical study.
Which I think it was really interesting to take, like, the Christian creation myth and find, like, nihilistic darkness within that.
Yeah, I love that a lot throughout all of these stories. He kind of was taking that and twisting it or just exploring it a little bit more and saying, like, you don't look deep enough, or you didn't look at this choice of words in the Bible and what they actually mean. And it's really cool to kind of take that stuff and find the horror in it and find the bleak, like, nothingness that's beyond it.
I mean, maybe it's just my atheism, but it's just kind of like, yeah, the Bible is a horror book. It's a horror story. It's not that big of a reach to turn to that material and turn it into a horror story. Like,
yes,
God drowned the world. Like, it's not. He's not a good dude at the end of the day. Like,
no, and yeah, just that, and I mean, even like just the concept of like what was before it and what was hidden and what those, like, what the darkness meant, and like when he shed light, if that's like, if you follow that kind of that story of the 7 days, it's like, well, if you look at the first day, what was in that dark and what was before it and what's still out there. I think that was like, it's like the main theme I remember kind of getting throughout all these stories is kind of that, like, that there's something a little bit beyond and something a little bit bigger that had this stuff that all of creation had to come out of. And so if you look back into that stuff, you're just like, yeah, there's just this horror that's hiding there that's just indifferent to us. I think you get that a lot in this story that I absolutely just adore, is just that kind of indifference to us and to everything in the universe, and just how, I mean, we as humans, we are very, I can't think of the word right now, egotistical and believing everything's about us. And Cardin explores, not only in this story, but in all of his other ones, kind of like, no, we're just these things that are here, and it's not about us. And if something comes rolling through, just destroying us, it doesn't even know it's destroying us. It's just doing it.
Yeah.
Yep.
What I liked was Cardin's exploration of God as being this younger entity than the Abyss. The Abyss predates him, and God's creations are just a pause in entropy. And humanity's belief in Christianity is, we're believing a lie, and our belief in that lie is the only thing that is keeping the Abyss from consuming us. We're just a brief pause.
Yeah, especially in this story, there's a lot of that, like, when you wake up and realize that that's where the true horror is, and like, you want to go back to not knowing, because that would be better. I thought I love that concept.
I think one of the stories in this collection that it really comes through the best for me was The God of Foulness. And in that one, an investigative journalist is charged with trying to get the scoop on a local chapter of the Sick and Saved movement.
Oh, yeah.
Which is this group that just worships sickness and disease. And it's like, this was written in 2002, which just completely floored me because reading it now.
Which one are you talking about?
The God of Foulness.
Oh, yeah. Oh, that's a fucking good one.
Oh, that was my favorite one in this collection. But it's like reading this now was completely fortuitous. It was, although it was written in 2002, this story was just like supremely 2020. It's like reading this story of people who are worshiping sickness while Trump is denying COVID and then getting sick with it and ending up in the hospital. It's like, okay, yep, this story is today. This is
it's such a good story.
It is fantastic. I think now I don't really have like a list of favorite short stories, but if I did, I think this is right at the top of that list. I think this became a new favorite for me. It's just fucking wonderful story. And conceptually, it's amazing. And Cardin just pulls it off so expertly. And it had for me one of the biggest oh shit moments out of all of them. Although Teeth had a really good oh shit climax that I liked.
Yes.
Oh man, Marco, man.
Yes.
Yeah. One thing before we dive into full spoilers for Teeth, I love how like the people who find out the truth of the abyss in Teeth, you can tell they found it because of their eyes. Like I just love that little image with just their glossed over eyes.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. I was trying to remember back. I was like, I'm trying to remember.
Because the guy's like, someone went back to see the professor and his eyes were just like yours.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, because they know the truth.
Yes.
They've seen the teeth. God damn. Matt Cardin, I don't know what it is, but this dude is some of the best horror that I've read like last year. Even this year. Like,
yeah.
This dude's an amazing horror writer.
It definitely needs more attention.
The mythology he's building here, although it relies on Lovecraftian aspects of cosmic horror, but he's certainly making it his own.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
He's pulling in all kinds of religious relevancy and explorations to this that I don't think I've seen done before, and definitely not as confidently as what Cardin does.
Yes.
Oh, not at all.
Right away, you can just tell it might have taken him a long time to write these stories, but in between he's basically the narrator of this story because he's studying this stuff like nonstop. He's pulling things out that you're just like, oh, you need to, it's like, where did you find all of this?
These stories are like his life study pretty much.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would say the one that is definitely him as the narrator is The Devil in One Lump.
Oh, yeah.
That one is hilarious and acutely self-aware. It's a self-parody of what he does here, where the author of these cosmic horror stories that are entwining religion and the abyss, and his stories are opening up the eyes of all of his readers to the true horrors that lie beyond this dimension. And in doing so, he's kind of fucking everything up for the devil. So the devil shows up in his living room one day to like try and convince him to stop writing this shit and do something else. Because God and I have this thing going on and you're really interfering with it. So we're going to do a new path.
I still love
his exploration of nihilism and just turns it into something that's really, really humorous.
Totally. I still love the first story, An Abhorrence to All Flesh.
Yeah.
Just the imagery in that story alone.
The rotting flesh.
Yeah, the worm.
I love that concept too because it relies on God's creation where he has shaped the dirt into man and woman and has brought it to life. But inside of us, there's all that rot and the dirt and the worms, and we're just like these walking bags of decay.
Yep.
Oh, it was fantastic. And then when the lead character kind of he's made aware of this truth, like whenever he looks down at his hands, it's just like these rotting appendages.
Yep.
Oh, I loved it. Yeah, this is
so good, man.
Fantastic. And it's a great opening to this collection.
Matt Cardin's fucking fantastic. I keep on saying that, but it's true.
It's true. It's true. I don't know how I have missed him all of these years, but reading this collection, I mean, now up there with like John Langan and Padgett and Matt Bartlett as authors that I absolutely have to watch for new material from.
It is kind of funny to think that, because I just finished the Langan book and I just started talking about Matthew Bartlett. I started his Gateways to Abomination the other day. And so, yeah, I'm neck deep in all of this kind of stuff, and I love it.
Gateways to Abomination, so fucking good.
Yeah. And I mean, Bartlett does completely different story style using similar premises. I mean, his is a lot more, it's pulpier. It's, I want to say, more entertaining, and I'm using that very loosely because what Cardin and Langan do, they're great entertainers, but this is going to sound like a knock, but these stories that they're doing are more cerebral, whereas Bartlett is absolutely fantastic, but in kind of a pulpier, gorier, goopy way.
Yes.
Which Bartlett loves his goop.
I love his goop too. I think he is he is really great at giving us the goop. Like it's he is such a blast to read that WXXT is one of my favorite literary creations.
Yeah.
It's so much fun.
If you haven't heard it yet, there's the audiobook for Gateways to Abominations narrated by Jon Padgett.
Yes.
It's fantastic.
It is.
And to get us back into Teeth, Jon Padgett did narrate Teeth on PseudoPod. So if you're listening to this, hunt that one down. It's a two-parter.
Yeah. And they've kind of made this cool little troupe of cosmic horror authors between Bartlett and Cardin, linked by Padgett. He's kind of right in the middle of both of these two worlds that these authors have created. And it's a fantastic lineup.
Definitely.
So
getting into Visterion.
Getting it. Well, Cardin's chief editing Visterion now too.
Exactly. Ooh. Yeah. So there's the trifecta. Or there's the meeting point.
But when it comes to Teeth is a story of what happens when you find out that all of existence is meant to be digested down this teeth-ridden abyss full of rotting flesh.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And what that does to your fucking mind.
And we're not supposed to know that it's happening.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're supposed to know after we die, after the abyss takes us.
Yes.
One of the central conceits behind pretty much every story in this collection, and that's what makes it cosmic horror, is these people accidentally discovering the truth.
Yes.
They're finding these awe-inspiring terrors. They're everything that they thought they knew about the way existence works is completely upended.
Yeah, so basically there's Marco, and then I'm drawing a blank. What's the main character's name?
Narrator.
That's it. I thought they say his name.
If these stories are first person narrative, so I don't know how important a name for him is.
Yeah, that's true. So our narrator, he's studying to be this. He's studying philosophy, and
he's going for his doctorate.
And
he just wants to live in academia.
Yes, and he meets his friend Marco in the library, and we get a pretty good description. This Marco guy is extremely smart and just knows everything. And he's
doing like 3 doctorates simultaneously.
Yeah, exactly. In really tough stuff too. It's crazy. And
he's a smart cookie.
He has this notebook that he's been writing his big research. And then he passes it to the narrator. And he passes the page. There's 2 pages that has this drawing on it. And the drawing that opens up our narrator's eyes to this abyss, to this teeth. And after that, it just consumes him. He's reading through this notebook and finding out I mean, basically everything we said, that there's something bigger going on. And once we know it, once we know the illusion is an illusion, then we're doomed. It's safer to be within the illusion. And so he's kind of haunted by this. And then eventually he tries to find Marco and he can't. And he realizes that Marco had written more in the notebook after the drawing. And basically his whole plan is to kind of spread this news to everybody. Marco's plan is. And so
I don't think Marco's plan is to spread the news to everybody.
No?
He wants to share it, but at the same time,
true.
He doesn't want the teeth to consume everything.
Yeah, I liked the implication that the Abyss had kind of reached out to Marco. Like whatever studies Marco has been engaged in, he was kind of a conduit for the Abyss to spread its reality. There's a certain segment in here where Marco doesn't remember drawing this giant mandala that the narrator becomes witness to. The way this mandala moves of its own accord as a drawing, and like the the spatial, it's like a moving image that reveals itself to whoever sees it. But there's an implication that it drew itself. Marco doesn't remember drawing this thing at all.
Marco was just the conduit.
Yeah, so there's this implication that the Abyss is using Marco as a tool to spread its truth and kind of work at destroying God's creations and open their eyes to the reality of the void.
And our narrator, he's the one trying to understand this void. Yeah. Understand what's happening. And he doesn't want to spread to other people, but at the same time, he wants to know the full truth from Marco when Marco disappears.
And of course, this is all much to their detriment.
I do love the idea of the illusions, because the story deals with a lot of philosophy. There's Nietzsche's in this story, Lovecraft's in this story.
Yeah.
I love he uses, Sankara, the Indian philosopher.
Yeah.
Yes.
When it's just Brahman is real, the world is false. The soul is only Brahman, nothing else. So it's just we live in a false reality, and all that matters is our essence, our Brahman, and that's what the Abyss wants to consume.
Cardin himself is extremely well educated. He's got a PhD in religious studies, or I think he has a PhD in religious studies, he's obviously
he's doctorate.
Yeah,
he's a PhD.
He's very well versed in religion and philosophy, and obviously cosmic horror, and he puts all three of these concepts together in extraordinarily smart ways. This has a lot of intellectual weight and merit to it. It isn't just fluff like I write. There's a lot of brains into this, and it makes for a dense read, but it's so fulfilling.
Damn good read.
Yeah, it's intellectually fulfilling. It's a smart read. I don't like the term elevated horror, but this is definitely in that vein of elevated horror. This is supremely intelligent horror.
Very much so. And even the way he works this to make the payoff be so successful as it is, because this story, the payoff is fucking perfect.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I want to be a fly on the wall when Cardin was writing any of his stories and just be how the fuck do you do this?
Yeah. How did you come up with this? I mean, how are you tying in entropy and physics and Sankara and Brahman and God and Christ and Cthulhu and teeth and what the hell is going on? I mean, he's operating at a much higher level.
Yeah, I do love the climax of the story. We're jumping around a lot, but the story is kind of really simple if you break it down to the bare bones plot. Our narrator finds the drawing of teeth. It consumes our narrator's mind. He tries to find Marco to understand more. He begins reading Marco's journal to understand what's happening. He understands that the abyss, the teeth, are older than time and plans to consume all reality around them. Then there's a British philosopher who's going to talk at their college, who's going to reveal the truth of reality, I guess.
Yeah, I'm trying to find it. I wasn't sure if it was a philosopher or physics.
I think it's one or the other. And I know, like, Marco, he's afraid if this guy talks, the people who have seen the teeth are going to die.
Okay, yeah, Nigel Williamson. He's a physicist, astronomer, and professor at Cambridge who is coming to lecture on the grand theory of everything concerning the inner purpose of the universe and embodied in the chaotic irrationalities of the quantum realm.
Which it's interesting, like, at that. And when he wanted, you were right. He did want to stop him because there's a scene where Marco's yelling at Williamson, telling him he needs to stop, that the gate is great and all this stuff. Yeah. But, like, I guess the implication then with this is that what Nigel knew about this stuff too, like he knew that the teeth were out there.
Yeah, that's my takeaway.
Yeah. So I thought, because there's that. And then the other one that I was trying to figure out is the drawing. Like, how did Marco know to, like, was that the Abyss reaching out to him to draw that picture? Or, like, how did he find that gate to draw that picture?
I still think the Abyss found him.
Okay.
Yeah, I think the way the story leads up to is we don't find the Abyss finds us.
Yeah. Okay, yes.
And we become conduits for its message.
One thing that goes over the course of this book, although each of these short stories to Rouse Leviathan are standalone, there is an overarching narrative, and the way these stories are arranged, you do kind of get a beginning, middle, and end. And this kind of comes right at the middle of the book. And over the course of these stories, we're kind of seeing this cosmic battle between God and the Abyss play out. So when it opens in an abhorrence of all flesh, one of the things is God will banish those who learn his lies in fire.
God made the dirt and dirt made the earth.
Yeah, and God is a giant pyromaniac, so anyone who finds out about his fucking lies, he sets them on fire. And that's what happens when our narrator has a friend in an abhorrence to all flesh who reveals to him this secret history of an old religious order that was an offshoot of Christianity that was extolling the myth of the abyss and the deep and its relation to God, the Christian God, but also tying into old mythology like Sumerian mythology and Indian mythology. Yep. And when his eyes are open to that, the narrator is constantly seeing the decay and rot in everything. Like he gets a piece of meat out of the fridge and it's just like covered in maggots that couldn't have possibly been there because it was leftovers from the day before and in the fridge. How the fuck is it going to all of these maggots? So we're kind of seeing this interplay go out. And as it goes on, God is eliminating anyone who learns the truth of what he's doing. I think the Abyss is kind of reaching out to these targets that it thinks can be useful in spreading its word. And I think that's what we're seeing here. The Abyss reached out to this Cambridge physicist, and I would suspect to Marco as well. But I'm kind of guessing at some point, I don't know if it's God's hand playing a role in Marco's life or if it's Marco's own morality that is telling him he has to stop this Cambridge professor.
Yeah.
It's never really made clear, but he's clearly an instrument.
It seemed like it was Marco himself, only because Marco made a call. Because there's a whole when Marco is talking to the Cambridge professor, Cardin writes it like it's a play.
Yeah.
And he says something that's like, let me try to find it. Because there's something he says that makes it seem like it's real Marco and not Abyss Marco talking. He says...
as you're hunting that down, that does make sense because some of the stuff in the notebook before the drawing and even after the drawing is about that, like, wishing to go back to that, not knowing.
Like, I'll read the whole, like, thing between them. It says... Williamson, terrified. What are you doing? Marco, frantically yelling. You must not. Those who know it fully would perish. The gate is great and the small. You cannot let the madness become sanity. There is a tremendous sound of shattering glass. Williamson, stop it! What are you doing? Shouting and pounding on the door. Roger, open the door! Roger! Rising to a shriek. No, stop! There is the sound of a knife stabbing into a side of beef. Williamson's words shatter into incoherent screech followed by a liquid choking. A second sound emerges, wet tearing like the shredding of damp cloth. Williamson's voice falls silent. Marco screaming as if in mortal agony. The gate above and below, the one and the many. Oh God, the teeth! The teeth! Silence textured by sky, slick tinkling of some heavy object being dragged through shards of glass. Blackout end scene.
It's interesting, too, that Cardin relays that like a play.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's an earlier story called The Basement Theater, which is just like one or two stories before this one, that is about an actor whose life is controlled by an unseen playwright. It's metaphorical, but it's obviously a relationship between God and his creation.
But the reason why I think this is the real Marco is when he says, his first thing when he says, you must not, those who know it fully would perish, meaning like Marco would perish, our narrator would perish. And then the gate is great and the small. You cannot let this madness become sanity.
Yeah.
So
and I think for me, that gives more credence toward it being God writing this for Marco.
Well, especially if you tie that into that devil story too, where they're like, we know what you're doing and you need to stop. You're gonna ruin this for everybody. Yeah. So that plays into this, I think, a little bit too, and makes sense where he's like, no, we need to stop this because you're gonna mess it up for everybody.
Yeah. You go.
Well, I was just going to say, to me, I think that's ultimately why it points for me, like, it could be God or the devil, but I think the evidence of it being written as a play ties into the basement theater metaphor of a play. And it is God. The Abyss reached out to Marco and to the Cambridge professor, but somewhere along the line, Marco became an instrument of God to destroy the Cambridge professor. But then it raises the question of, well, why doesn't God just set that guy on fire like he did in The Abhorrence of Flesh?
But God works in mysterious ways, Mike.
This is true. But one way or another, I think Marco is an instrument, whether it's the devil or God. It doesn't probably make too much difference in the end.
Marco and our narrator, Marco and our narrator, they have zero agency in the story.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
They are, in this entire story, they have no agency. They're being controlled by things beyond their knowledge.
Yes.
So, it could be seen as both. Then it doesn't give us any clear answers. But the reason why I don't think it's the Abyss that makes Marco kill the professor is the Abyss wants people to know about it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, I don't think the Abyss is controlling Marco at that stage of the game at all. I do think it has given Marco information, or at least opened up a pathway for him to learn the truth. But I think at that point, Marco is not under control of the Abyss, but he does not have his own agency either. He's a pawn. He's being used by two different forces that are constantly at war. He's just caught in the middle. And our narrator is just kind of stumbled into it. He doesn't know what the fuck is going on.
I do love the description of the Abyss with this giant black spiraling endless hole with teeth all over the side and rotten meat is pinched to the teeth and
so fucking perfect.
It's such a disturbing image.
It's great. I love it. I want an art for my wall of that.
Yeah. So with all of that, why do we think Marco showed our narrator his notebook?
Because
was that the Abyss trying to pass on?
That was the Abyss trying to pass on. That's my interpretation.
Yeah, I think it's a viral thing, right? It kind of ties into that God of foulness aspect also, where it's a worshiping of this disease. So Marco has lost some of his marbles, I think it's safe to say. He is probably not psychologically intact at that point. So I do think there is an aspect of the Abyss playing through him in that regard, where it's going after, in this early stages, these intellectuals.
Yes.
Because it does reveal itself an awful lot to philosophy majors, writers, physicists. I mean, it's going after the intellectual crowd.
Well, and it's interesting too how it if we're looking at it like maybe how it appeals to those people. I mean, like when we're introduced to the narrator, we know he loves to study. He talks about how he has his, I think he calls it like his extracurricular. I can't even say that word. His extra studies.
Curricular?
Yeah, that one.
Yeah.
Where he doesn't care. Like it doesn't matter what he's going for in school. He goes to the library to study his own stuff, and he loves talking to Marco philosophically. He loves having arguments. We get these bits and pieces of like how they like to kind of go back and forth. And so then for Marco to give him the notebook, and we see it's like 7 days of our narrator just studying these 44 pages or 45 pages, because I think the picture's on the 46 one. So that, which makes sense to do exactly what you guys have been saying, is because he's so engrossed in the studying this notebook and reading it and trying to figure out where Marco got all this information and how he's tying these philosophers with Lovecraft. And he does a good job of avoiding looking back at the picture. That's kind of he's haunted by it after having seen it. But then so I guess what that just makes sense. It's like kind of taunting, kind of pulling him in by like saying like study all this and then come back and look at the picture, because that will fully cement that you were in here. And then that compares kind of to the very end of the story, which is at that point he's accepted it and he's just waiting for the teeth to show up for himself. So yeah, I think that makes sense of how it's getting him.
I think it's interesting too, and I don't know if it was a deliberate bit of commentary or because of its absence on Cardin's part, but the Abyss goes after adults, people who have vast intellectual capacities. Whereas when you look at religion and the way it's passed down, religion is usually something that targets the young.
Yeah.
You're raised with these beliefs from the time of infancy. You become baptized before the age of reason. It's like you're indoctrinated into religious faith, usually because of who you were raised by and because of who they were raised by. It's usually a generational thing. It isn't something you come into on your own accord. It's simply because your parents bring you into it. But the Abyss goes after people who are well beyond the age of reason, people who are intellectually astute. And I think that's just an interesting bit of commentary for me anyway.
Oh no, I agree.
Kind of shows 100%. Like Christianity as being this lie we tell children. So now that you're an adult, here's the awful truth. It's kind of like Santa.
Yeah. Well, and I wonder too if that also kind of is like I don't know, like almost like a game for the Abyss, because it is kind of almost challenging itself. Like it would be easy to do exactly what you said, to get at children young and just have them, like show them behind the curtain. But like now, especially with like these professors and everything like that, the way it's kind of revealing itself to them, it's almost, despite the fact that I said that it ignores us and doesn't really care about us, that could also be like a bit of a challenge that like you've gone through all of this, because they even make a joke about philosophy, I think, at the beginning, and how it's just people use it to make sense of things, and that's stupid. Yeah. Can't remember the exact wording, but Marco kind of has like a line about like philosophy and how it doesn't do what we really think it does. So, it's almost that the Abyss is kind of that last temptation of like, well, I'm going to get you when you think you're at your smartest or at your most astute, and then you'll fully appreciate the power of this Abyss and nothingness.
Yeah, and that's reflected too in another earlier piece with that monk who is transcribing the Bibles. He thinks a lot of these characters are really kind of pretentious and full of themselves and their intellectual weight. And this monk thinks he is like the most spiritual monk that has ever lived. And he's going through like he's so pious and perfect and this utmost standard of what his religious beliefs are. And the abyss reveals itself to him as it's transcribing these Bibles, that it's coming to him between the lines. Like, he has to see this imagery that isn't there, but he's writing it because he's reading it between the lines of what's actually stated.
Yes, exactly. That's what I was trying to remember and try to get to before. It's that, like, reading between the lines, what's the opposite of being said. And I love that he kind of did that, where he's like, this is being said, but that also inversely means X is being said as well. And I thought that was, so yeah, that I wonder if he, as he was getting all his degrees, Cardin, if this is like him poking fun at all the other students. Like all these kind of, because they are all sort of pretentious in their, like, vast knowledge and how they know all, and then by the end of it he kind of beats them down. So I'm wondering, did he have some pretentious classmates?
Oh, you think you're big shit because you made the dean's list? Well, I'm going to show you.
I also, one thing I like about the story too is, like, the fate of all the characters. So, like, Marco gets locked up in a mental institution.
Yeah.
And I love the whole scene when, like, our narrator goes to show him the book, the journal, to, like, have Marco make sense of it, and Marco just goes mad and attacks him.
Yeah.
And bites off 2 of his own fingers.
And now that the narrator knows the truth, he just basically gives up on academia and finds the most simplistic job he can find in suburbs, and is just kind of waiting to die.
He's waiting for his time to come. He knows what his fate is, and he doesn't want anyone else to know what this fate is.
Yeah, so he's kind of keeping this big secret and has become a recluse.
Yep.
It's just completely shattered any aspirations he had, because it's like, what's the point of all of this philosophy and religious acumen now when it's just nothing? It's just teeth. Teeth
and digestion. Oh, this story, man.
So good.
I'm glad you finally got to read Matt Cardin, Mike.
I am too. I mean, this whole collection, I really liked the chronology of it too, where we have a lot of Cardin's expounding on the relationship between Christ and Cthulhu, but then there's one point in the story where it kind of goes beyond that.
Yep.
And it's like, okay, here's the truth of the religion, and here's how we're presently looking at it, and here's what religion will become after the truth is known, which I thought was just fantastically done.
Oh, very much so.
Yeah, there's a lot of really good stories in here. Teeth.
This makes me want to do a Ligotti episode soon.
I think we need to. I need to read some Ligotti now.
Oh, Ligotti's a trip.
I know we've talked about it in the past. We have to.
Yeah.
We need to definitely get that on the schedule. Figure it out.
Yeah.
I'll try to find a good Ligotti story for you. Maybe one involving mannequins.
Yeah. Make your choice on that.
He has a lot of mannequin stories.
Then we'll have to do that. There's that one Laird Barron story where it's very clearly him poking fun at Thomas Ligotti and Jon Padgett. We'll have to do that one next.
But even, like, all these guys, it's just like this whole... I find Matt Cardin's horror to be a lot more... in Padgett's horror and Bartlett's and Ligotti's horror to be more, like, impactful to me, more so than, like, your splatter novel with all the goopy goo. It's like it just hits you like existentially.
My particular?
Oh no, Mike. Yes, I will say
yours specifically.
That egg scene still was pretty effective.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, looking at the stuff Matt Cardin and John Langan does, like, those are far more intellectual pieces of horror than I think I'm capable of pulling off. Like, I'm definitely toiling more in, like, yeah, I'm more in, like, the Brian Keene blue collar end of the horror writing. Like, I mean, you know, and that has its place, but I mean, Langan and Cardin, they're academics. They are bringing the full weight of their intelligence to their horror, and I love that. I appreciate it very much because I do kind of fancy myself as a smart guy once in a while. Not to toot my own horn.
I feel like there's 2 parts of my brain. Yeah. There is the intellectual part of my brain due to, like, academia and college.
Yeah.
And then there's the goopy goblin goo part of my brain.
Yeah.
And, like, the your work makes the goopy goblin in my brain very happy.
Oh, well, thank you.
And like Padgett's work makes the intellectual part of my brain happy.
Yeah. And, it just shows you the breadth and depth that horror can get into. It isn't all just like Friday the 13th slasher stuff, which certainly has its place and is supremely enjoyable.
That makes the goopy goblin in my brain happy.
Yeah. It all has its place, right? But horror is such an expansive genre that it can do so much. It's a shame that it's kind of considered the bastard of genre literature. It doesn't have that kind of mainstream respect that serial killer thrillers get, even though that is a part of the horror genre. But there's just so much elasticity to this field that we can get into. And I appreciate on this show that it gives us a chance of those ends of the spectrum. We can go from urban gothic to Teeth, that's
to the freak show.
Yeah. There's so much variety that we can explore in here. And I like that. Horror is just such an expansive genre. And I appreciate that we get to cover so much of it through this weekly show.
Yeah,
me too. And I will say to our audience, if you're not so much of an intellectual horror person and you have a goopy goblin in your brain that you want to make happy, the freak show is going to make that goopy goblin in your brain very happy.
Maybe.
Oh, jeez. Here we go.
I'll save it.
I kind of, you'll see my opinion of it when it goes through as well. I'm not a big extreme horror fan, so like, I think it's a fun book so far, but that's all I'll say.
All right. Well, I'm going to be starting it today, and we'll be talking about that next week.
Indeed, we will. And hopefully you guys get to read along with us, because this episode will be out next week for y'all.
Yep.
But where can listeners get in touch with us, Matt?
I am on Twitter at BrandenburgDM.
Mike.
Presuming I have not been banned from Twitter, they can find me over there at MikeH5856, or hit up my website at michaelpatrickhicks.com and buy some unintellectual splattery books.
And presuming I am on parole by now, you can follow me at Rudy53088 and the podcast, which I've been tweeting under, at Into Staring. But this is Richard Gerlach saying, keep on staring.
Hey guys, this is Ryan,
Nick, and Mike,
the hosts of Your New Opinion. We're a bi-weekly comedy debate podcast.
Just a group of idiot friends who are very opinionated.
Each episode, we debate some hot-button issue and use every trick we can to get our judge to side with us.
Hot-button issues like books versus movies, is the Earth flat, and Godzilla versus King Kong.
We cover topics like pop culture, conspiracy theories, and everyday absurdity.
So find us on iTunes or wherever you download podcasts every other Friday. Again, that's Your New Opinion, only on the Project Entertainment Network.
This has been a presentation of the Project Entertainment Network.